Are you speak from there?
Oh. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
No. Finish videotape myself.
Be some interesting information.
Alright, let's call us off order. I pulled you guys in a couple minutes before 15 was up to get you used to be in your seats when that 15 minutes is up. No one wants to be the one that the judges are all waiting for. And if you're a certain amount of time late, you'll be disqualified from your round. So it's good to get you guys in your seats at that time. See what it feels like when everybody's still finishing up from time when they're sitting next to their opposing team. Okay, Cassie will be keeping time for us. Is everyone familiar with the time signals that's in front of the room? Yes, okay, I explained them earlier, so that's great. So Cassie will also be recognizing speakers to take the floor, but I'm just going to do the first one. So starting off with Tim, our Honorable Prime Minister, to deliver a speech not to exceed 7 minutes on the following motion, that patents for life-saving drugs should not be allocated.
Thank you for having us today. This society that we live in today, this age, is the most advanced society that has ever existed on the face of this planet, and more people have been saved because of our society of advancements of technology. But we believe that society's basic principle is that we should look out for the common good of one another. So our value today that we're going to value, and we're going to show why we're going to win today, is because we value human life. And our value is that this proposition is going to benefit the greatest good for the greatest many for society. So we're going to say patents on life-saving drugs should not be allocated, should not be allowed, because they're bad for society. We're going to say that obviously that we're the U.S. and patents obviously is the U.S. Patent Office, which will not be able to give life-saving patents on technological advancements, that type of thing. We think that's sufficiently defined. So let me start by defining our 3 main points, right? So this is going to keep the most amount of people alive. Secondly, that patents create class warfare, which is anti-poor. And third, Cody's going to extend my my speech about how this creates the most competition, which actually creates a better society. So let me start my first point about this, creating the most amount of people. But let's think about what this is, right? This is the U.S. government allowing a business or an inventor to have an artificial monopoly on an invention or an idea or technology, right? So the U.S. government is co-opting with somebody saying, nobody else can use this. Right? So we do not think that this is a good thing. Let me give you an example of how this is terrible for society and how this has happened in the years past. Bayer, a huge multinational company, put together a couple compounds. They called it aspirin. They patented it with the U.S. government's help, and nobody could use that chemical compound unless they bought it from Bayer. Bayer artificially jacked up the price because it was a monopoly. And then no people, or less people, right, unless you had the money, could afford this life-saving chemical, right? So now that the patent is gone, and everyone has aspirin today, right? Everyone knows that aspirin, that aspirin's good for you. You take an aspirin a day, you know, you have less heart attacks. Now society benefits from that because there's not a patent, and there's generics, which generics is an important component of this. And why do you think that's a good thing?
Can you tell me how many people died exactly because they couldn't afford aspirin back then?
No, but the principle stays the same. And unless you can prove otherwise, I think we can clearly say that that's a good thing, that if more people have access to this chemical that Bayer suddenly marketed as this greatest thing, and the only reason that they marketed it is because they were given the monopoly, which we think is unfair. Anyways, let me give you another example of which contrasts with your question. The inventor of the shot that cured polio gave it away. He didn't go to the U.S. government and say, I'm going to make millions of dollars off this because everyone from our U.S. President Eisenhower to all these kids were struck with polio and could not walk, right? So that man said, I'm going to give this away. And there's clearly a difference, right? He saved millions of lives because he had heart. Whereas companies like Bayer, who didn't have heart because they only had a profit motive, were after making money instead of the betterment of society. Let me give, I'll take a question and I'll get another second.
Do you think the United States government is a better distributor of life-saving drugs than a private corporation would be?
I'm going back to our point. Our value is that society comes together and we say that we have to talk about the greatest good for society. And if you think corporations making more money is better than society benefiting, then you guys can debate that. We'd love to hear. So my second point is that patents create a class warfare, which is anti-poor. Now, you know, we have, like, you know, antitrust laws and anti-monopoly laws, right? Because we don't want businesses to get too powerful. right, so that they can crush the poor, right? They can crush the working class, which unfortunately many people would say happens. But let me give you an example or an interesting thing. Obviously, I talked to you about aspirin, and not many people could have it. Now it's affordable because you can have a generic of it because nobody owns aspirin. But let me ask you a question about food. Do you think somebody should be able to own food? Like the idea of like a tomato, right? Or a genetic variation of it, or like a crop if you make a corn that's taller than what? We don't think that's a good idea because we believe that you should be able to have gardens in your own house or make your own aspirin. So we think that these patents are actually anti-poor. I mean, another principle of that is the textbook, right? Because why are textbooks so expensive in America? Right? Because they have the patent or they have copyright, which only say that if this exact wording, this knowledge, this writing is only allowed to be printed in this version, otherwise we'll sue you. But in other places, you're allowed to have that. So we think that the same example of textbooks is a great example, and obviously I asked you about food. So our third point that that Cody's going to really extend, and I'll start a little bit of a preview, is that this creates the most competition. We think that the most competition is better for society. And an example I'll give you is Henry Ford, right? Henry Ford invented an engine, right? He invented a car. Now, if Henry Ford was able to say that nobody else could have anything remotely close to this, which is what the government does, especially in the instance with aspirin, which is a life-saving drug, nobody else would ever be able to have transportation or another vehicle because Henry Ford would have the only opportunity or means to be able to build transportation. So we think the same way that obviously nobody should be held out of transportation because nobody should be able to be stopped from having life-saving drugs as that kind of thing. So what have I told you today, right? Human life is our biggest value and that society will benefit from the greatest good. And I went over the ideas about that. You know, we're going to keep the most amount of people alive because society's going to benefit when companies are held to a fair standard, or entrepreneurs or whoever you want to call them who come up with these things. Instead of being able to hoard these devices or hoard these technologies, they're going to have to share with the rest of society, right? That's what science is about giving so society benefits. And I gave you some examples about Bayer versus polio. And then I talked to you about how patents create class warfare, where the poor are the most disadvantaged from this, right? You know, about antitrust laws, because those are obviously there in place to make sure that since the poor don't have the money to buy in society and buy favors and buy these rich things, that the poor needs to benefit instead of being held down, which is unfortunately what happens. So we think you're going to vote with us today, absolutely, because we benefit human life and the greatest good of society. And thank you for listening.